Hello and welcome to the Absolute Beginner Guitar Lesson Series. My name is Oliver and today's lesson is lesson number 30. Before we get into it, I think there's something very important that I need to sort of help you to understand. And what we really need to do is we need to take a look at the relationship between the root note of the scale and the seventh note of the scale. So I have a C major scale up on the screen, and we're looking to see how the seventh note of the scale relates to the root note of the scale. And I want to do sort of an illustration on the guitar, so I hope you'll indulge me. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose the note C that's at the 5th fret of the G string. So we're going to call C our root note. Now, in the C major scale, B is the 7th note of the scale. Now, if we look at our B or our C note that we have at the 5th fret on the G string, the B note is right next to it at the 4th fret. So this is the first thing that I need you to understand. If we have the root note at the 5th fret, the note that represents the 7th can be found 1/2 step or 1 fret below that note on the same string. So if the root is at the 5th fret, C, the 7th note of the scale, B, is at the 4th fret. So now we're on B, and B is the 7th note of the scale. However, if we flat this note, we'll get B flat. And B flat is at the 3rd fret on the G string. So I need you to sort of see that as well, that from the root note, which in this case is C at the 5th fret, to get to the flatted 7th note, we really only have to go down a whole step or 2 frets. So if the root is at the 5th fret, the flatted 7th is at the 3rd fret. And this is very important for us to understand. So now, let's talk about the fingerings for some of these chords. And there's a couple rules that we need to follow here, because what we're going to do is we're going to take existing chord fingerings and we're going to modify them so that we can get our major 7th, our dominant 7th, and our minor 7th chords. So the first thing we need to follow is that we need at least 4 strings, because there are 4 separate notes in this scale. So we need at least 4 strings. And whatever fingering we choose, we must have the root note twice in the fingering. So without further ado, let me get into it a little bit. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the C major chord. If we start with our 3-note version of the C major chord with our root note at the 1st fret on the B string, starting with the G string, we're playing the G string open, we're playing the C root note at the 1st fret on the B string, and we're playing the E string open. So that's a 3-note version of the chord. Now we want to add a note on the D string, and what we can do is we can add the E note that's at the 2nd fret of the D string. When we do that, we have our 4-string C major chord. However, we only have 1 C note. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add the note C that's on the 3rd fret of the A string. And I'm going to reach up with my ring finger to get that. And when we do that, we have a 5-string C major chord. Okay, so now what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to modify one of our C notes. So I want to turn your attention to the C root note that we're playing with our index finger at the 1st fret of the B string. Now we can lower this note, but we can only lower it by 1 fret. However, if we want to play the major 7th chord, then all we need to do is take the root note and lower it by 1 fret to get the 7th note of the scale. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that C root note that I'm playing at the 1st fret on the B string. I'm going to lower that by 1 fret, which makes it an open B note. And now I have my C major 7 chord. Now, we could do the same thing that we just did on the B string. We could do that on the A string. We have the root note C at the 3rd fret of the A string. And to get the 7th note, we need to lower that root note by a half step. So what I'm going to do is, instead of playing the root note at the 3rd fret, I'm going to play the note that's at the 2nd fret, which is B. And in order to do that, I'm just going to switch my fingering up a little bit. I'm going to take my middle finger and I'm going to use to play that note that's at the 2nd fret of the A string. And then I'm going to take my ring finger and to play the note that was previously being played with my middle finger. And when I do that, now I have another C major 7th chord. So now what about the dominant 7? Okay, let's go back to the regular C chord. For the dominant 7 chord, we need the note that is the flatted 7th. And the flatted 7th note is 2 frets below the root note on the same string. So now what I'm going to do is, instead of playing the C root note at the 3rd fret of the A string, I'm going to drop that down and I'm going to play that B flat note that's at the 1st fret of the A string. And I'm going to need to change my fingering up a little bit. So I'm going to use my index finger to play that B flat note. Then I'm going to take my middle finger and I'm going to play that C root note that's at the 1st fret on the B string. And then I'm going to reach up with my ring finger and I'm going to play that E note that's at the 2nd fret of the D string. So we still have the same notes of the chord, with the exception of the note we're playing on the A string. But it required me to change my fingering. It looks a little bit different. But anyway, when we take this note, we now have the dominant 7 chord. So the thing to remember about this C is we can move both of these root notes. As far as the root note, the C that's on the B string, we can only lower that by 1 fret. But when we do, we get the 7th note. So we can use that for the major 7th chord. And we also have the option of using the note on the A string. If we lower that by 1 fret, we get the major 7th. And if we lower it by 2 frets, that is, we find the flatted 7th note at the 1st fret of the A string, we now can play the dominant 7 chord. So put in your time, put in your work, and I hope to see you there. Peace.